Gaetano Pesce was one of the most progressive and visionary designers of the late 20th century. Also one of the leading figures of the Italian radical design movement that was most prominent during the late 60s through to the mid-1970s. So much of Pesce's work was, like his contemporaries, rooted in a context of the late 60s countercultural movement and the protest movement that was so dominant in that time and so influential on later social and cultural and design developments. And that's very much exemplified in this object, the Moloch floor lamp. It dates from 1972. And it's named after a deity from ancient biblical texts. This was a deity associated with rituals of child sacrifice. So a very sort of fearsome figure. And I think Pesce is choosing this name partly through a kind of tongue-in-cheek commentary on the notion of design icons and how they loom literally quite large in our cultural consciousness. But it's also very much associated with this idea of the ancient and the timeless, these ideas that Pesce constantly revisited throughout his career. The idea of this fearsome deity really conveys to viewers of this object this idea of an immense, gargantuan, perhaps even terrifying scale. Because what we're looking at behind us is this lamp, which when you see an image of it, you might think it looks like a typical domestic desk lamp or a task lamp. It's only when you see it in scale and context with another person or this piece of furniture next to it that you understand that it has been scaled up, in fact, 4 times larger than its design inspiration. So what Pesce is doing here is creating a sort of moment of social critique, subversion around what has become an extremely all-pervasive everyday design object in our lives. This object is in fact based on an iconic example of early 20th century design, the Luxo L1 lamp, which was designed in the late 1930s. But this lamp was in fact based itself on a British design, the Anglepoise lamp by George Cowardine. So both these lamps, which have become so familiar to us in our everyday lives and has sort of generated thousands of other kind of knockoffs and copies, it was sort of open and sort of ripe for kind of piercing and sort of critique. And that's what he's really doing here with this object, to kind of scale this up to a context in which the object becomes disorientating and almost disassociated from its design inspiration. It's also interesting to note that that original Anglepoise lamp was really derived from George Cowardine's experience working in car manufacturing. So one of the things I love about this object is when you see it at a close-up distance, you can really see these sort of gorgeous engineering details, whether it's the kind of hinge joints, the bolts, or that spring mechanism. And of course, the big design revolution with this object was that it was a lamp that could really be moved in a number of directions as a task light. You know, it was very associated with kind of architects' drafting tables, for example. And I think that's also speaking to this idea of Pesce's response to the sort of fetishization that we associate with design objects and the kind of idea of perhaps even inbuilt design obsolescence when one thinks about the perpetual marketing campaigns for the new Apple iPhone, those gorgeous close-up pan-shot details of an iPhone. Those surfaces seem so beautiful and tactile and reflective and luscious. And that's very much an echo of what Pesce was responding to the kind of plethora of marketing imagery which surrounded a design icon like the Luxo L1 lamp. This is a sort of a very tongue-in-cheek statement, very much infused with the irony and wit which was so associated with that movement of Italian designers in the late 60s and early 70s. This lamp was unveiled to a much wider audience during a landmark exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1972 called Italy, the New Domestic Landscape, which was really a very important moment to showcase the work of all of these Italian radical designers, including Pesce, who really was a leading figure within that group, but also designers such as Ettore Sottsass, Gay Olenti, Joe Colombo, and architectural collectors such as Archizoom and Super Studio. And this lamp was a key work within that exhibition, and it really kind of cemented the legacy of that group of designers who were really trying to create something as a reaction against that sort of legacy that came from the Bauhaus onwards. So what is so interesting about this object is this spirit of material experimentation and this wit and irony held within this commentary, this sort of subversion of a design icon. And when we scale this object up to become this kind of giant looming over this gallery, one can't help but think about how Pesce is almost anthropomorphizing this object, where it's sort of, with the kind of the posable lamp head almost feels like a kind of human head, and the sort of way in which the frame bends feels like a body bending at the waist. And it's interesting that that kind of subversion of this design object to become something almost human-like is something that you see in the very early days of Pixar animation, interestingly. So, we're now very familiar with that classic Pixar Animations logo, the sort of Luxo lamp, which itself, like the Pesce Moloch lamp, is based on the same Luxo L1 lamp from the 1930s. And like Pesce, there's also this kind of idea of anthropomorphizing, but that object, the Luxo L1 lamp from the 1930s, or the Anglepoise lamp a few years before, it's almost like that design icon has become even more all-pervasive, and the millions of people that go and see a major Pixar movie will see that L1 posable like task lamp. And here at the NGV, you get to see Pesce's subversion of that design icon, which I think presents to us a very important social critique and makes us think about many of these important design issues that we're facing today.